Hello. Before we begin, a quick note. The Boy to Sleep podcast relies on you and sponsors, which means you will hear a quick advertisement before the beginning of tonight's episode. While the podcast is free, you are welcome to subscribe for just $2.99 per month, which supports the creation of this podcast and gives you an ad-free listening experience. Simply click the link in the show notes from your podcast app. Rest easy.
This episode is brought to you by Prime. Obsession is in session, and this summer, Prime Originals have everything you want. Steamy romances, irresistible love stories, and the book-to-screen favorites you've already read twice. Off Campus, Elle, Every Year After, The Love Hypothesis, Sterling Point, and more. Slow burns, second chances, chemistry you can feel through the screen. Your next obsession is waiting. Watch only on Prime.
Sierra has all the best active and outdoor brands you need. From athletic stuff, like a full court pickup game, swish, to athletic-ish stuff, like a half-mile stroll. Get those steps in. And for morning hikes up the mountain trail, good pace. To nighttime ghost stories from the camping chair. What a twist. Whatever level of active, Sierra loves it all. Head to Sierra or Sierra.com for the brands you want at the prices that let you do it all. From athletic to athletic-ish, Sierra's got it.
Hello. Welcome to the Bore You to Sleep podcast. The podcast that will hopefully help you get to sleep. I am going to read an open source book, one that is not particularly interesting, but one that is hopefully boring enough to get you to sleep. Tonight's reading comes from White Fang, written by Jack London and published in 1906. White Fang is the story of a wild wolf dog's journey through the Yukon wilderness and his gradual transformation through human kindness. My name is Teddy, and I aim to help people everywhere get a good night's rest. Sleep is so important, and my mission is to help you get the rest you need. The podcast is designed to play in the background while you slowly fall asleep. For those of you who are new to the podcast, you may not know that it started from my own struggles with sleep. I wanted to create a resource for others facing similar challenges, and I'm so grateful for the amazing community we've built together. The podcast is self-made and self-produced, which is why you'll hear a short ad at the beginning of each episode. These ads, along with support from subscribers and patrons on Patreon, enable me to keep delivering this podcast for free to those who need it. Thank you to everyone who shared their words of gratitude with me during the week, whether through the website or your podcast app. Your messages mean the world to me. If you find the podcast beneficial and would like to support it, here are a few ways you can contribute. Follow the podcast in your app and leave a comment. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. You can also become a subscriber for $2.99 per month. This also creates for an ad-free listening experience. If subscribing is not possible, and I appreciate that it is not possible for everyone, then simply leaving a review and rating in your podcast app really helps out. You can always say hello to me by visiting boytosleep.com, and if you know someone out there who might benefit from a good night's rest, you're always welcome to share the podcast with them. In the meantime, lie back, relax, and enjoy the readings. White Fang by Jack London. Chapter 1. Dark spruce forest frowned on either side the frozen waterway. The trees had been stripped by a recent wind of their white covering of frost, and they seemed to lean towards each other, black and ominous in the fading light. A vast silence reigned over the land. The land itself was a desolation, lifeless without movement, so lone and cold, that the spirit of it was not even that of sadness. There was a hint in it of laughter, but of a laughter more terrible than any sadness, a laughter that was mirthless as the smile of the Sphinx, a laughter cold as the frost and partaking of the grimness of infallibility. It was the masterful and incommunicable wisdom of eternity, laughing at the futility of life and the effort of life. It was the wild, the savage, frozen-hearted Northland wild. But there was life, abroad in the land and defiant. Down the frozen waterway toiled a string of wolfish dogs. Their bristly fur was rimed with frost. Their breath froze in the air as it left their mouths, spouting forth in spumes of vapour that settled upon the hair of their bodies and formed into crystals of frost. Leather harness was on the dogs, and leather traces attached them to a sled, which dragged along behind. The sled was without runners. It was made of stout birch bark, and its full surface rested on the snow. The front end of the sled was turned up, like a scroll, in order to force down and under the bore of soft snow that surged like a wave before it. On the sled, securely lashed, was a long and narrow oblong box. There were other things on the sled, blankets, an axe, and a coffee pot and frying pan, but prominent, occupying most of the space, was the long and narrow oblong box. In advance of the dogs, on wide snowshoes, toiled a man. At the rear of the sled toiled a second man. On the sled and the box lay a third man whose toil was over, a man whom the wild had conquered and beaten down until he would never move nor struggle again. It is not the way of the wild to like movement. Life is an offence to it, for life is movement, and the wild aims always to destroy movement. It freezes the water to prevent it running to the sea. It drives the sap out of the trees till they are frozen to their mighty hearts, and most ferociously and terribly of all does the wild harry and crush into submission man who is the most restless of life, ever in revolt against the dictum that all movement must in the end come to the cessation of movement. But at front and rear, unawed and indomitable, toiled the two men who were not yet dead. Their bodies were covered with fur and soft tanned leather. Eyelashes and cheeks and lips were so coated with the crystals from their frozen breath that their faces were not discernible. This gave them the seeming of ghostly masks, undertakers in a spectral world at the funeral of some ghost. But under it all they were men, penetrating the land of desolation and mockery and silence, puny adventurers bent on colossal adventure, pitting themselves against the might of a world as remote and alien and pulseless as the abysses of space. They travelled on without speech, saving their breath for the work of their bodies. On every side was the silence, pressing upon them with a tangible presence. It affected their minds as the many atmospheres of deep water affect the body of the diver. It crushed them with the weight of unending vastness and unalterable decree. It crushed them into the remotest recesses of their own minds, pressing out of them, like juices from the grape, all the false arches and exaltations and undue self-values of the human soul, until they perceived themselves finite and small, specks and motes, moving with weak cunning and little wisdom amidst the play and interplay of the great blind elements and forces. An hour went by, and a second hour. The pale light of the short sunless day was beginning to fade, when a faint far cry arose on the still air. It soared upward with a swift rush, till it reached its topmost note, where it persisted, palpitant and tense, and then slowly died away. It might have been a lost soul wailing, had it not been invested with a certain sad fierceness and hungry eagerness. The front man turned his head until his eyes met the eyes of the man behind, and then, across the narrow oblong box, each nodded to each other. A second cry arose, piercing the silence with needle-like shrillness. Both men located the sound. It was to the rear, somewhere in the snow expanse they had just traversed. A third and answering cry arose, also to the rear and to the left of the second cry. "They're after us, Bill," said the man at the front. His voice sounded hoarse and unreal, and he had spoken with apparent effort. "Meat is scarce," answered his comrade. "I ain't seen a rabbit sign for days." Thereafter they spoke no more, though their ears were keen for the hunting cries that continued to rise behind them. At the fall of darkness, they swung the dogs into a cluster of spruce trees on the edge of the waterway and made a camp. The coffin at the side of the fire served for seat and table. The wolf dogs clustered on the far side of the fire, snarled and bickered amongst themselves, but evinced no inclination to stray off into the darkness. "Seems to me, Henry, they're staying remarkable close to the camp," Bill commented. Henry, squatting over the fire and settling the pot of coffee with a piece of ice, nodded. Nor did he speak till he had taken his seat on the coffin and begun to eat. "They know where their hides is safe," he said. "They'd sooner eat grub than be grub. They're pretty wise, them dogs." Bill shook his head. "Oh, I don't know." His comrade looked at him curiously. "First time I ever heard you say anything about their not being wise." Henry said the other, munching with deliberation the beans he was eating. "Did you happen to notice the way them dogs kicked up when I was feeding them?" "They did cut up more than usual," Henry acknowledged. "How many dogs have we got, Henry?" 6. "Well, Henry," Bill stopped for a moment in order that his words might gain greater significance. "As I was saying, Henry, we've got 6 dogs. I took 6 fish out of the bag. I gave 1 fish to each dog, and Henry, I was 1 fish short. You counted wrong. We've got 6 dogs," the other reiterated dispassionately. "I took out 6 fish. 1 ear didn't get no fish. I came back to the bag afterwards and got him his fish. We've only got 6 dogs," Henry said. "Henry," Bill went on, "I won't say they was all dogs, but there was 7 of 'em that got fish." Henry stopped eating to glance across the fire and count the dogs. "There's only 6 now," he said. "I saw the other one run off across the snow," Bill announced with cool positiveness. "I saw 7. Henry looked at him commiseratingly and said, "I'll be almighty glad when this trip's over." "What do you mean by that?" Bill demanded. "I mean that this load of on is getting on your nerves and that you're beginning to see things." "I thought of that," Bill answered gravely. "And so, when I saw it run off across the snow, I looked in the snow and saw its tracks. Then I counted the dogs, and there was still 6 of 'em. The tracks is there in the snow now. Do you want to look at them? I'll show 'em to you." Henry did not reply but munched on in silence, until, the meal finished, he topped it with a final cup of coffee. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and said, "Then you're thinking as it was." A long wailing cry, fiercely sad, from somewhere in the darkness, had interrupted him. He stopped to listen to it, and then he finished his sentence with a wave of his hand toward the sound of the cry. "One of them." Bill nodded. "I'd a blame sight sooner than anything else. You noticed yourself the row the dogs made. Cry after cry and answering cries were turning the silence into a bedlam. From every side the cries rose, and the dogs betrayed their fear by huddling together, and so close to the fire that their hair was scorched by the heat. Bill threw on more wood before lighting his pipe. "I'm thinking you're down in the mouth some," Henry said. Henry, he sucked meditatively at his pipe for some time before he went on. "Henry, I was a-thinking what a blame sight luckier he is than you and me'll ever be." He indicated the third person by a downward thrust of the thumb to the box on which they sat. "You and me, Henry, when we die, will be lucky if we get enough stones over our carcasses to keep the dogs off us. But when we ain't got people and money and all the rest like him," Henry rejoined, "long-distance funerals is something you and me can't exactly afford. What gets me, Henry, is what a chap like this, that's a lord or something in his own country, and that's never had to bother about grub nor blankets, why he comes a-budding around the God-forsaken ends of the earth, that's what I can't exactly see. He might have lived to a ripe old age if he'd stayed at home," Henry agreed. Bill opened his mouth to speak, but changed his mind. Instead, he pointed towards the wall of darkness that pressed about them from every side. There was no suggestion of form in the utter blackness. Only could be seen a pair of eyes gleaming like live coals. Henry indicated with his head a second pair and a third. A circle of the gleaming eyes had been drawn around their camp. Now and again a pair of eyes moved or disappeared to appear again a moment later. The unrest of the dogs had been increasing, and they stampeded in a surge of sudden fear to the near side of the fire, cringing and crawling about the legs of the men. In the scramble, one of the dogs had been overturned on the edge of the fire, and it had yelped with pain and fright as the smell of its singed coat possessed the air. The commotion caused the circle of eyes to shift restlessly for a moment, and even to withdraw a bit, but it settled down again as the dogs became quiet. "Henry, it's a blame misfortune to be out of ammunition." Bill had finished his pipe and was helping his companion to spread the bed of fur and blanket upon the spruce boughs which he had laid over the snow before supper. Henry grunted and began unlacing his moccasins. "How many cartridges did you say you had left?" he asked. "3," came the answer, "and I wished it was 300. Then I'd show 'em what for. Damn 'em." He shook his fist angrily at the gleaming eyes and began securely to prop his moccasins before the fire. "And I wished this cold snap'd break," he went on. "It's been 50 below for 2 weeks now, and I wished I'd never started on this trip, Henry. I don't like the looks of it. I don't feel right, somehow. And while I'm wishing, I wished the trip was over and done with, and you and me a-sittin' by the fire in Fort McGurry, just about now and playing cribbage. That's what I wished." Henry grunted and crawled into bed. As he dozed off, he was aroused by his comrade's voice. "Say, Henry, that other one that come in and got a fish, why didn't the dogs pitch into it? That's what's botherin' me." "You're botherin' me too much, Bill," came the sleepy response. "You was never like this before. You just shut up now and go to sleep, and you'll be all hunky-dory in the morning. Your stomach's sour, that's what's bothering you." The men slept, breathing heavily side by side, under the one covering. The fire died down, and the gleaming eyes drew closer, the circle they had flung about the camp. The dogs clustered together in fear, now and again snarling menacingly, as a pair of eyes drew close. Once their uproar became so loud that Bill woke up. He got out of bed carefully, so as not to disturb the sleep of his comrade, and threw more wood on the fire. As it began to flame up, the circle of eyes drew farther back. He glanced casually at the huddling dogs. He rubbed his eyes and looked at them more sharply. Then he crawled back into the blankets. "Henry," he said, "oh, Henry." Henry groaned as he passed from sleep to waking and demanded, "What's wrong now?" "Nothin'," came the answer. "Only there's 7 of 'em again. I just counted." Henry acknowledged receipt of the information with a grunt that slid into a snore as he drifted back into sleep. In the morning, it was Henry who awoke first and routed his companion out of bed. Daylight was yet 3 hours away, though it was already 6 o'clock, and in the darkness, Henry went about preparing breakfast, while Bill rolled the blankets and made the sled ready for lashing. "Say, Henry," he suddenly asked, "how many dogs did you say we had?" "6. "Wrong," Bill proclaimed triumphantly. "7 again," Henry queried. "No, 5. One's gone." "The hell," Henry cried in wrath, leaving the cooking to come and count the dogs. "You're right, Bill," he concluded. "Fatty's gone." And he went like greased lightning once he got started. Couldn't have seen 'em for smoke. No chance at all, Henry concluded. They just swallowed me alive. I bet he was yelping as he went down their throats. Damn 'em. "He always was a fool dog," said Bill. "But no fool dog ought to be fool enough to go off and commit suicide that way." He looked over the remainder of the team with a speculative eye that summed up instantly the salient traits of each animal. I bet none of the others would do it. "Couldn't drive 'em away from the fire with a club," Bill agreed. "I always did think there was something wrong with Fatty anyway." Breakfast eaten and the slim camp outfit lashed to the sled, the men turned their backs on the cheery fire and launched out into the darkness. At once began to rise the cries that were fiercely sad, cries that called through the darkness and called to one another and answered back. Conversation ceased. Daylight came at 9 o'clock. At midday the sky to the south warmed to rose colour, and marked where the bulge of the earth intervened between the meridian sun and the northern world. But the rose colour swiftly faded. The grey light of day that remained lasted until 3 o'clock, when it too faded and the pall of the Arctic night descended upon the lone and silent land. As darkness came on, the hunting cries to right and left and rear drew closer, so close that more than once they sent surges of fear through the toiling dogs, throwing them into short-lived panics. At the conclusion of one such panic, when he and Henry had got the dogs back in the traces, Bill said, "I wish they'd strike game somewheres and go away and leave us alone. They do get on the nerves horrible," Henry sympathized. They spoke no more until camp was made. Henry was bending over and adding ice to the babbling pot of beans when he was startled by the sound of a blow, an exclamation from Bill, and a sharp snarling cry of pain among the dogs. He straightened up in time to see a dim form disappearing across the snow into the shelter of the dark. Then he saw Bill, standing amid the dogs, half triumphant, half crestfallen, in one hand a stout club, in the other the tail of the part of a body of a sun-cured salmon. "I got half of it," he announced, "but I got a whack at it jez the same. Must be a tame wolf, I reckon. It's damned tame, whatever it is, coming in here at feeding time and getting its whack of fish." That night, when supper was finished and they sat on the oblong box and pulled at their pipes, the circle of gleaming eyes drew in even closer than before. "I wished they'd spring up a bunch of moose or something and go away and leave us alone," Bill said. Henry grunted with an intonation that was not all sympathy, and for a quarter of an hour they sat on in silence. Henry staring at the fire and Bill at the circle of eyes that burned in the darkness just beyond the firelight. "I wished we was pulling into the McGarry right now," he began again. "Shut up your wishing and your croaking," Henry burst out angrily. "Your stomach's sour. That's what's ailing you. Swallow a spoonful of sody and you'll sweeten up wonderful and be more pleasant company." In the morning, Henry was aroused by fervid blasphemy that proceeded from the mouth of Bill. Henry propped himself up on an elbow and looked to see his comrade standing among the dogs beside the replenished fire, his arms raised in objurgation, his face distorted with passion. "Hello," Henry called. "What's up now?" "Frog's gone," came the answer. "No. I tell you yes." Henry leaped out of the blankets and to the dogs. He counted them with care and then joined his partner in cursing the power of the wild that had robbed them of another dog. "Frog was the strongest dog of the bunch," Bill pronounced finally. "And he was no fool dog either," Henry added. And so was recorded the second epitaph in 2 days. A gloomy breakfast was eaten, and the 4 remaining dogs were harnessed to the sled. The day was a repetition of the days that had gone before. The men toiled without speech across the face of the frozen world. The silence was unbroken save by the cries of their pursuers, that unseen hung upon their rear. With the coming of night in the mid-afternoon, the cries sounded closer as the pursuers drew in according to their custom, and the dogs grew excited and frightened and were guilty of panics that tangled the traces and further depressed the 2 men. "There, that'll fix you fool critters," Bill said with satisfaction that night, standing erect at completion of his task. Henry left the cooking to come and see. Not only had his partner tied the dogs up, but he had tied them after the Indian fashion with sticks. About the neck of the dog he had fastened a leather thong. To this, and so close to the neck that the dog could not get his teeth to it, he had tied a stout stick 4 or 5 feet in length. The other end of the stick, in turn, was made fast to a stake in the ground by means of a leather thong. The dog was unable to gnaw through the leather at his own end of the stick. The stick prevented him from getting at the leather that fastened the other end. Henry nodded his head approvingly. "It's the only contraption that'll ever hold one ear," he said. "He can gnaw through leather as clean as a knife and jazz about as half as quick. They'll all be here in the morning, hunky-dory." "You just bet they will," Bill affirmed. "If one of 'em turns up missing, I'll go without my coffee. They just know we ain't loaded to kill," Henry remarked at bedtime, indicating the gleaming circle that hemmed them in. "If we could put a couple of shots into 'em, they'd be more respectful. They'd come closer every night, get the firelight out of your eyes, and look hard there. Did you see that one?" For some time the two men amused themselves with watching the movement of vague forms on the edge of the firelight. By looking closely and steadily at where a pair of eyes burned in the darkness, the form of the animal would slowly take shape. They could even see the forms move at times. A sound among the dogs attracted the men's attention. One ear was uttering quick, eager whines, lunging at the length of his stick toward the darkness, and assisting now and again in order to make frantic attacks on the stick with his teeth. "Look at that, Bill," Henry whispered. Full into the firelight, with a stealthy, sidelong movement, glided a dog-like animal. It moved with commingled mistrust and daring, cautiously observing the men, its attention fixed on the dogs. One ear strained the full length of the stick toward the intruder and whined with eagerness. "That full one ear don't seem scared much," Bill said in a low tone. "It's a she-wolf," Henry whispered back. "And that accounts for Fatty and Frog. She's the decoy for the pack. She draws out the dog and then all the rest pitches in and eats 'em up." The fire crackled. A log fell with a loud spluttering noise. At the sound of it, the strange animal leaped back into the darkness. "Henry, I'm a-thinkin'," Bill announced. "Thinkin' what?" "I'm a-thinkin' that was the one I saw earlier." "No doubt about it in the world," was Henry's response. "And right here I want to remark," Bill went on, "that the animal's familiarity with campfires is suspicious and immoral. It knows for certain more'n self-respectin' wolf ought to know," Henry agreed. "A wolf that knows enough to come in with the dogs at feedin' time has had experiences." "I reckon you've called the turn, Bill. That wolf's a dog, and it's eaten fish many's the time from the hand of man. And if I get a chance at it, that wolf that's a dog will just be meat," Bill declared. "We can't afford to lose no more animals." "But you've only got 3 cartridges," Henry objected. "I'll wait for a dead sure shot," was the reply. In the morning, Henry renewed the fire and cooked breakfast to the accompaniment of his partner's snoring. "You was sleeping just too comfortable for anything," Henry told him, as he routed him out for breakfast. "I hadn't the heart to rouse you." Bill began to eat sleepily. He noticed that his cup was empty and started to reach for the pot. But the pot was beyond arm's length and beside Henry. "Say, Henry," he chided gently, "and you forgot something." Henry looked about with great carefulness and shook his head. Bill held up the empty cup. "You don't get no coffee," Henry announced. "Ain't run out?" Bill asked anxiously. "Nope." "Ain't thinking it'll hurt my digestion?" "Nope." A flush of angry blood pervaded Bill's face. "Then it's just warm and anxious. I'm about to hear you explain yourself," he said. "Spanker's gone," Henry answered. Without haste, with the air of one resigned to misfortune, Bill turned his head, and from where he sat counted the dogs. "How'd it happen?" he asked apathetically. Henry shrugged his shoulders. "Don't know. Unless one ear gnawed him loose. He couldn't have done it himself, that's sure." "The darned cuss," Bill spoke gravely and slowly, with no hint of the anger that was raging within him. "Jez, because he couldn't chew himself loose, he chews Spanker loose. Well, Spanker's troubles is over anyway." "Go on," Henry pleaded, elevating the pot. Bill shoved his cup aside. "I'll be ding-dong-danged if I do. I said I wouldn't if Airy Dog turned up missing, as I won't." "It's darn good coffee," Henry said enticingly. But Bill was stubborn, and he ate a dry breakfast washed down with mumbled curses at one ear for the trick he had played. "I'll tie 'em up out of reach of each other tonight," Bill said as they took the trail. They had travelled little more than 100 yards when Henry, who was in front, bent down and picked up something with which his snowshoe had collided. It was dark and he could not see it, but he recognized it by the touch. He flung it back so that it struck the sled and bounced along until it fetched up on Bill's snowshoes. "Meb, you'll need that in your business," Henry said. Bill uttered an exclamation. It was all that was left on Spanker, the stick with which he had been tied. "They ate 'em, hide 'em all," Bill announced. "The stick's as clean as a whistle. They've ate the leather offen both ends. They're damn hungry, Henry, and they'll have you and me guessing before the trip's over." Henry laughed defiantly. "I ain't been trailed this way by the wolves before, but I've gone through a whole lot worse and kept my health. Takes more'n a handful of them pesky critters to do for yours truly, Bill, my son." And that concludes tonight's readings. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this story, and if you're not quite tired yet, you're always welcome to listen to another episode of the Boy to Sleep podcast. Until next time, good night.